is Marino-Sayde, and I'm going to discuss about Altman Z, Z prime, and Z double prime scores. So as for my learning outcomes, after the discussion, the student should be able to identify the importance and use of Altman Z scores, to differentiate the scores, and of course to compute and analyze companies using the said scores. So as for my list and references, here are the books and websites that I've used to come up with this discussion. So every company wants to anticipate how they will be or in what status they will be in the future. No one wants to be surprised and just discover that the company they invested in turns out to be bankrupt. Firms would prefer to know the possibilities of bankruptcy beforehand, and one of the ways is to use the Z-scores introduced by Edward Altman. We have here is the Altman Z-score or the standard Z-score. So Altman combined a set of 5 financial ratios to be able to come up with this model with the use of multiple discriminant analysis or multivariate analysis. So this is primarily used to forecast the probability of a publicly traded company's failure, in which the 8 needed variables are from the company's financial statements. So the essential inputs are current assets, current liabilities, total liabilities, earnings before interest and taxes, total assets, net sales, retained earnings, and of course market value of equity or the market capitalization. The next model we have here is the revised model or the Altman Z prime scores. So for this model, this is now intended for the credit analysts to have an insolvency valuation model for privately held companies. So the only difference of this model to the former model, which is the standard Z score, is that we are now going to use the book value of equity instead of the market value of equity. Because if we're going to use the market value of equity, we tend to encounter problems when it comes to computing the market value, which is we're going to consider the share outstanding times the stock price of the company. And when the stock price is high, so the result of the whole ratio would also be high. And another thing for this model is that the essential inputs that we need are also the same with the standard Z-scores, except for the changes stated a while ago. We have here the Altman Z double prime scores, or the model intended for the use of non-manufacturing companies. So this model was mainly altered from the revised model, which is the Altman Z prime scores. The only difference is that the asset turnover ratio was completely removed because it is believed to be industry sensitive. And Edward Altman said that he wanted to minimize the effect of manufacturing intensive ratio. The financial ratios and weight factors that composes the different models. So we have here the first one, which is expressed as the earnings before interest and taxes all over the total assets. So this ratio is used to measure how efficient a company is in generating sales from its assets before deducting interest and taxes. The next one, we have here net sales over total assets. So this is simply the asset turnover ratio, and this is used to measure how efficient a company is in generating sales from its own assets. So the only difference of these assets from the first ratio is that the first ratio uses operating profit or income, while the second one uses net sales or net revenue. The third one, we have here the market value of equity all over the total liabilities. So this is the fluid measure of the market's confidence to the company. So this is also used to measure how much of the market value or the company's market value could decline before the liabilities exceeds its assets. As for this ratio, the market value of equity, as I've said earlier, was replaced by the book value of equity in the case of the revised model and the model for non-manufacturing companies. So the next is the working capital or the current asset minus the current liabilities all over the total asset. So this provides information of the financial position of the business based on its balance sheet. So it is said that the more working capital the company has compared to its total assets, the more or the better liquidity situation the company has. But we have to consider 2 different things. The first one is that positive working capital doesn't always mean that it is good. So one of the reasons why the working capital is positive is that the inventory is too much. So it will cost, of course, the current asset to exceed the current liabilities. And another thing is that the company may not be investing the excess cash that they have. The thing is that if there's a negative working capital, it doesn't always mean that it is bad. One of the reasons or possible reasons why there is a negative working capital is because it is led by a high inventory ratio. So if there's a high inventory ratio, it could also mean that the companies has a leverage over their suppliers but has a favorable payment terms. So in turn, the company could have great or high current liabilities that exceeds its current assets, resulting to a negative working capital. Lastly, we have here the retained earnings all over the total assets. So this ratio is used to measure how in debt the company is, and it also shows as a history of profitability for the company. It is said that if the company has a little or no retained earnings, so it has to look for funds somewhere to continue with its operation, and it could be either from debt or dilution. So for the weight factors of these models, so we have here for the standard Z scores, for the Z prime scores, and of course for the Z double prime scores. So as I've said earlier, the asset turnover ratio was removed in the model for non-manufacturing companies, so we don't have any weight factors for that anymore. So this is the summary of the equation for the different Z scores. If you want more explanation and examples for the different models, I'm going to show it on Friday. But for now, let's move on to my conclusion. In a nutshell, Altman Z scores are statistical techniques that can be used as a guide in determining the company's bankruptcy. But the more years you analyze, the less accurate the results will be. For Altman said that the score models are best used in determining or forecasting within the next 2 years of operation from only after the year analyzed.